Have you ever been so desperate for help that you trusted someone with everything, only to find out they betrayed you in ways you never thought possible? That's exactly what happened to me. I thought my boyfriend was my rock, the one person I could count on when life got tough, especially with the mounting pressure of paying for college. But the lengths he went to helped me. They destroyed everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and family. Here's the thing. Betrayal doesn't always come from your enemies. Sometimes it's the people closest to you who hurt you the most. Imagine finding out that the person you love, the person you share your life with, has been hiding a secret so devastating it turns your world upside down. And worse, my own father was part of it. What they did together in the name of helping me wasn't just a mistake. It was a choice that left me questioning everything. In this video, I'll take you through every shocking detail of what happened, how I found out, how I confronted them, and how I started piecing my life back together. If you've ever felt betrayed, or if you've faced a moment where trust was shattered, I want you to know you're not alone. Stick around because this isn't just a story about pain. It's a story about finding strength in the rubble. Before we dive in, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss more stories like this. And tell me in the comments, what's the biggest betrayal you've ever faced? Let's talk about it. When I tell you I've been through some wild things in my life, I mean it. But nothing could have prepared me for this. It all started with the pressure of trying to pay for college. You know how expensive it is, right? Every semester felt like climbing a mountain, with tuition bills looming over me like storm clouds. Scholarships helped a little, but they were never enough to cover everything. Between textbooks, housing, and meals, I was drowning. And asking for help wasn't easy. My dad and I had always had a rocky relationship. He wasn't the type to hand out financial support without a lecture attached. That's where my boyfriend came in. Let's call him Jake. Jake was the kind of guy you dream about, supportive, loving, and always there to pick me up when I felt like the weight of the world was on my shoulders. He'd remind me that I wasn't alone, that we'd figure things out together. If I was stressing about tuition, he'd tell me, "We'll make it work, babe. Don't worry." And for a while I believed him. I mean, who wouldn't? He made me feel like I had a partner, someone who'd do anything to help me succeed. But looking back now, I can see how naive I was. I trusted him completely, maybe too much. At the time, though, I was just grateful to have someone in my corner. Someone who believed in me when I struggled to believe in myself. My dad, on the other hand, was a different story. He wasn't exactly the nurturing type. Our relationship was distant, cordial on the surface, but always strained. He wasn't the kind of dad who offered hugs or "I'm proud of you" speeches. He was practical to a fault, focused on rules and responsibility. So, when he started offering to help me financially, I was surprised, relieved but surprised. Jake and my dad were polite to each other, nothing more. Or so I thought. There were moments when I noticed them talking quietly, but I didn't think much of it. I assumed Jake was just being supportive, trying to smooth things over with my dad for my sake. But hindsight is 20/20, isn't it? There were cracks in the story that I ignored because I was so desperate for things to work out. Little did I know that financial help, those conversations between Jake and my dad, were just the beginning of a hidden truth that would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, family, and trust. It all began with subtle changes, little things that, at the time, didn't seem like much but now feel glaringly obvious. My dad wasn't exactly known for his generosity. In fact, he had always been pretty tight with money, often reminding me how hard he had worked for every penny. So, when he suddenly offered to help cover part of my tuition, I was shocked. And relieved, of course, but mostly shocked. "Consider it an investment," he said one night, shrugging like it was no big deal. I didn't question it too much. I was just grateful to have one less thing to worry about. But looking back, there were moments that should have raised red flags. My dad started calling Jake by his first name. A small detail, but unusual considering my dad had barely acknowledged his existence before. And Jake, who usually avoided spending much time with my dad, suddenly seemed comfortable around him. They'd have these short, private conversations that would stop the second I walked into the room. I'd ask, "What are you guys talking about?" And they'd both shrug it off with a casual, "Nothing important." First, I thought it was nice that they were getting along. Jake had always told me he wanted to be on good terms with my family, and I assumed he was just making an effort for my sake. But the way they acted around each other, it wasn't just casual friendliness. There was a kind of tension I couldn't quite put my finger on. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't comfortable either. Felt secretive. Then there were the nights when Jake would come home later than usual. He'd always have an excuse, a work meeting that ran over, a last-minute favor for a friend, but his stories didn't always add up. Once, he came home smelling like my dad's cologne. I remember joking about it, saying, "Wow, you smell like you just walked out of my dad's closet." He laughed it off, saying he'd run into my dad at the gym and borrowed his spray. At the time, I believed him. Why wouldn't I? But now the memory makes my stomach turn. One evening, I overheard them talking in the kitchen while I was upstairs. Their voices were low, almost hushed, but I caught bits and pieces. "We can't let her find out," Jake said. My dad replied with something I couldn't make out, but the tone was sharp, almost defensive. My heart sank. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was overreacting. But the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. There was also the money. My dad started covering expenses without me even asking, paying off bills, slipping extra cash into my account. I wanted to be grateful, but it felt wrong. It wasn't like him to be so generous, and I couldn't shake the feeling that there was a catch. When I brought it up, he brushed me off, saying, "Don't worry about it. Focus on school." It was out of character, but I convinced myself that maybe he was trying to make up for being distant all those years. Jake too seemed to be changing. He'd always been attentive, but now he was almost too attentive, constantly checking in on me, asking if I needed anything, going out of his way to make sure I was okay. At first it felt sweet, but over time it started to feel suffocating. Like he was overcompensating for something. I remember one night, he made dinner and cleaned the entire apartment, then sat me down and said, "You know I'd do anything for you, right?" His tone was serious, almost desperate. I smiled and said, "Of course I know that." But in the back of my mind, I couldn't help but wonder, why was he acting like this? The tension between them and their strange behavior around me started to feel like a puzzle I couldn't solve. I'd catch little glances they'd exchange when they thought I wasn't looking, or notice how my dad would avoid direct eye contact when Jake was in the room. It was like they were in on some inside joke that I wasn't a part of. And it wasn't just me noticing. My best friend Lauren picked up on it too. "Something's off," she said one afternoon. "I don't know what it is, but your dad and Jake, they're weird around each other." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Then there was the day I came home early from class and found Jake in the driveway talking to my dad. They didn't see me at first, so I stood there for a moment, watching. Their conversation seemed intense, with Jake gesturing toward the house and my dad crossing his arms. When they finally noticed me, they both stiffened like kids caught doing something they weren't supposed to. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Just talking about some repairs for the house," my dad said quickly. Jake nodded in agreement, but his face was flushed, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Those moments, those little clues, kept piling up. At the time I couldn't piece them together, but they gnawed at me. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my gut, even if I didn't have the evidence to back it up. And yet I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. After all, why would Jake, the person who had always been my rock, and my dad, the man who rarely went out of his way for me, have anything to hide? But deep down I knew. I didn't want to admit it, but I knew. The hidden truth was there, lurking just below the surface, waiting to be uncovered. And when it finally came out, it would change everything. The truth has a way of coming out when you least expect it. For me, it happened on a random Tuesday afternoon. An ordinary day that quickly became anything but. I had come home early, hoping to surprise Jake with lunch. He wasn't expecting me, and I liked the idea of doing something nice for him, given how stressed he'd seemed lately. But as I walked through the front door, I heard voices, low, hurried, and unmistakably tense. At first, I couldn't make out what they were saying. The sound was coming from the living room, so I quietly set down the food and moved closer. Jake and my dad were sitting on the couch, leaning toward each other like they were in the middle of a serious conversation. I froze, unsure whether to interrupt or wait to see what was going on. Then I heard Jake's voice, sharp and urgent. "This has to stop. We can't keep doing this." My heart dropped. Keep doing what? I stayed hidden, straining to catch every word. My dad sighed, his tone cold and dismissive. "You knew what you were getting into. Don't act like you're innocent in all this." I stepped into the room before I could stop myself, my voice trembling. "What's going on?" Both of them turned to me, their faces draining of color. Jake stood up quickly, running a hand through his hair, while my dad stayed seated, glaring at him like this was somehow his fault. "Nothing," Jake said too quickly. "We were just talking." But the panic in his eyes told me it wasn't just talking. My dad, ever the stoic, shrugged and said, "It's nothing you need to worry about." That's when I noticed the envelope on the coffee table. It was addressed to my dad, but Jake's name was scrawled across the front in my dad's handwriting. I picked it up, ignoring their protests, and opened it. Inside was a check, made out to Jake, for an amount that could have covered my entire year of tuition. My stomach churned. "What is this?" I demanded, holding up the check. Jake tried to grab it, but I pulled away, my voice rising. "What's going on, Jake? Why is my dad giving you money?" The room fell silent. Jake looked at my dad, who was staring at me with a mixture of frustration and something else I couldn't quite place. "Guilt, maybe." Jake finally spoke, his voice barely audible. "It's not what you think." "Then what is it?" I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. "Because right now, it looks like the two of you have been hiding something from me." Jake sighed, running his hands over his face. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. "I was trying to help you," he said finally, his voice cracking. I did it for you." "Did what?" I asked, my voice trembling. My dad stood up then, his tone sharp. "Enough, Jake. She deserves to know." The words that followed felt like a punch to the gut. Jake admitted that he'd slept with my dad. The room seemed to spin as he stumbled through an explanation, saying it started as a desperate attempt to secure the money I needed for school. My dad had made an offer Jake apparently couldn't refuse. "He said it was the only way," Jake said, his voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My dad, who had always been so rigid, so cold, had somehow crossed this unimaginable line. And Jake, the person I trusted most in the world, had gone along with it. "You're telling me," I said, my voice shaking, "that you slept with my dad to pay for my tuition? Are you insane?" Jake tried to explain, to justify his actions, but his words only made it worse. "I was desperate," he said. "I didn't want to see you give up on your dreams. It wasn't about me, it was about you." I turned to my dad, who had remained disturbingly calm throughout Jake's confession. "And you," I said, my voice filled with anger and disbelief. "What the hell were you thinking? Offering him money for that? How could you do this to me?" My dad's response was as cold as ever. "You needed the money and he agreed. End of story. End of story." My entire world was crumbling, and he acted like this was just a transaction, a deal that had nothing to do with me. The betrayal hit me like a wave, pulling me under and leaving me gasping for air. Everything I thought I knew about my dad, about Jake, about our relationships was a lie. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I grabbed my things and walked out, slamming the door behind me. But the weight of the revelation followed me. It wasn't just about the betrayal. It was about the hidden truth that had been lurking beneath the surface for months. The family secrets, the lies, the moral lines they had both crossed. All of it left me questioning everything. As I sat in my car, trying to process what had just happened, I realized this was only the beginning. The emotional fallout, the confrontation, the decisions about what to do next. It was all waiting for me. But for now, all I could do was sit there, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how the people I loved the most could hurt me so deeply. Confronting betrayal is like ripping off a bandage. It hurts, it's messy, and it forces you to look at the wound underneath. I couldn't ignore what I had learned. The truth had shattered every ounce of trust one had in Jake and my dad, and I wasn't about to let it sit in silence. They owed me answers, real ones this time. So I went back, ready to demand the full story. I started with Jake. We sat across from each other in the living room, the tension so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. He looked like he hadn't slept, his face pale and his hands fidgeting in his lap. "Talk," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Explain yourself." Jake looked up at me, his eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't know what else to do," he began, his voice cracking. "Your dad offered to pay for your tuition, but only if I agreed to his terms." He paused, struggling to find the words. "It wasn't about me. It was about you. I just wanted to help you." His words hit me like a slap in the face. "Help me?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You call sleeping with my dad helping me? Do you even hear how insane that sounds?" I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, threatening to spill over. "You could have come to me, Jake. We could have figured it out together. But instead you did this." Jake tried to justify his actions, saying he felt trapped, that he didn't want to burden me with more stress. But the more he talked, the more his excuses felt like empty words. "You should have told me," I said, my voice trembling. "You should have trusted me. Instead you lied. You betrayed me." He reached out, trying to take my hand, but I pulled away. "I love you," he said, tears streaming down his face. I thought I was doing the right thing. But his love felt like a cruel joke now, tangled up in lies and deceit. I couldn't look at him without feeling the weight of his betrayal. Next I turned to my dad. This confrontation was even harder. He was my father, the person who was supposed to protect me, to set an example, to be a pillar of strength. Instead, he had become the architect of this entire nightmare. When I walked into his study, he barely looked up from his desk. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but laced with anger. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "I figured this was coming," he said, as if we were discussing the weather. His indifference only fueled my anger. "What were you thinking?" I demanded. "How could you offer something like that? How could you involve Jake in whatever this is?" My dad sighed, his tone exasperated. "You needed the money and he agreed. End of story. End of story." I repeated, my voice rising. "This isn't just about money, Dad. You used Jake. You manipulated him. And in the process, you destroyed my relationship, my trust in both of you. Do you even care about what you've done?" He finally looked at me, his expression softening for the first time. "I did what I thought was best," he said quietly. "You've worked so hard for your education. I wasn't going to let you throw that away because of money." "But at what cost?" Shot back. "Did you even think about how this would affect me? Or were you too busy playing God with my life?" My voice cracked as the weight of his betrayal hit me all over again. "You didn't just betray me, Dad. You made me question everything I thought I knew about you." The confrontation escalated into a shouting match. I accused him of being selfish, of prioritizing control over compassion. He fired back, saying I didn't understand the sacrifices he'd made for me, the pressure he'd felt to provide. But his justifications fell flat. No amount of pressure could excuse what he'd done. By the end of it, I was emotionally drained. I walked out of his study, slamming the door behind me, and collapsed onto the couch in the living room. My head was spinning, my heart aching. The two people I had trusted most in the world had torn my life apart, and now I was left to pick up the pieces. In the days that followed, I couldn't bring myself to talk to either of them. I needed space, time to process the layers of betrayal and figure out what to do next. The emotional fallout was overwhelming, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let their actions define me. Somehow, I had to find a way to move forward. But how do you move forward when the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest? That question lingered in my mind as I tried to make sense of it all, knowing the hardest part was yet to come. The days that followed felt like I was living in someone else's nightmare. My mind kept replaying the confrontations with Jake and my dad, each word cutting deeper than the last. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, sadness, disbelief, guilt. How had it come to this? How had my life spiraled so far out of control? Emotionally, I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, teetering between fury and heartbreak. My mental health took a nosedive almost immediately. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, the guilt in Jake's eyes, the cold indifference in my dad's. I couldn't escape the constant loop of thoughts. What did I miss? How could I have been so blind? Was this somehow my fault? The guilt was suffocating, even though deep down I knew I wasn't to blame. My self-esteem took a massive hit. I kept asking myself if I was worth so little to them that they would make decisions like this without a second thought. Jake's betrayal felt like a personal failure, like I hadn't been enough for him to just come to me with the truth. My dad. His actions made me question everything I thought I knew about family. The very person who was supposed to protect me had instead orchestrated my heartbreak. I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, but it was impossible. Going to class felt like walking through quicksand. Every smile I forced from my classmates felt like a lie. My professors noticed that I was distracted, and my grades started slipping. Even small tasks like cooking or cleaning felt monumental. I remember standing in the kitchen one evening trying to make dinner, and suddenly bursting into tears because I couldn't even decide what to eat. It was like my brain had short-circuited, unable to handle even the simplest decisions. At the same time, I felt this bizarre dependence on both of them. I hated what they had done, but I wasn't ready to completely cut them out of my life. Jake was still the person I had loved for years, and my dad, despite everything, was still my father. The thought of losing them entirely was terrifying, even though being around them felt like ripping open a wound that hadn't even begun to heal. The push and pull between love and betrayal was exhausting. I started avoiding my dad's calls altogether. Every time I saw his name on my phone, my stomach would churn, and I'd let it ring until it stopped. Jake, on the other hand, was harder to avoid. We still lived together, though I could barely look at him without feeling a wave of anger and sadness crash over me. He tried to talk, to explain, to apologize, but his words felt hollow. I wasn't ready to hear them, not yet. The shame was perhaps the hardest part to deal with. I felt like I couldn't tell anyone what had happened. How could I explain something so deeply personal, so utterly humiliating? I confided in my best friend Lauren, but even then I struggled to get the words out. Her shock mirrored my own, and while her support was comforting, it didn't erase the heaviness I felt every second of every day. "You didn't deserve this," she told me over and over. I wanted to believe her, but part of me still felt responsible, like I should have seen the signs sooner or done something to prevent it. Therapy became my lifeline. I found a counselor who specialized in betrayal trauma, and those sessions quickly became the only place where I felt like I could breathe. She helped me unpack the layers of hurt, guilt, and anger, reminding me that healing would take time. She also encouraged me to set boundaries, something I had always struggled with. "You can love people and still demand better from them," she said during one session, and those words stuck with me. I started journaling too, pouring every thought and emotion onto the page. Some nights, I would write for hours, letting the tears fall as I scribbled furiously about everything I was feeling. It wasn't a solution, but it was a release, a way to make sense of the chaos inside me. Despite the pain, there were small moments of clarity. I began to realize that my dad's actions said more about him than they did about me. His coldness, his manipulations, they weren't reflections of my worth, but of his inability to see the damage he was causing. Jake's betrayal, while devastating, also revealed his own flaws and insecurities. I started to see that their choices weren't about me. They were about them. Still, the emotional fallout wasn't something I could just get over. It affected every part of my life. Trust, in particular, felt like a distant memory. I found myself questioning everyone's intentions, second-guessing even the smallest acts of kindness. If the two people closest to me could betray me so deeply, who could I trust? The idea of letting anyone else in felt impossible. But even in the midst of the pain, I knew I had to keep moving forward. Staying stuck in that dark place wasn't an option. Slowly, I started taking small steps toward healing. I spent more time with Lauren, who reminded me that not everyone in my life was capable of such betrayal. I started prioritizing self-care, even if it was as simple as taking a walk or listening to music that made me feel good. And I leaned on therapy to guide me through the mess. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead still felt impossibly long. But I was beginning to see that while I couldn't change what had happened, I could choose how to respond to it. I could choose to rebuild, not for them but for me. And that realization, small as it was, gave me a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could find peace again. The truth didn't just shatter my world. It sent ripples through every relationship in my life. It was like tossing a stone into a perfectly still pond. The waves reached places I hadn't even realized were connected. My family, my friends, my entire sense of stability. Everything felt destabilized in the aftermath of the revelation. The dynamic with my dad was the first thing to change. Before this, our relationship had always been complicated. He was distant but reliable, someone who showed his care through actions rather than words. But now, every action, every word felt calculated. The trust one had left in him was gone. I avoided family gatherings and even stopped visiting his house, unable to face the man who had manipulated Jake and, by extension, me. Conversations became surface level, stripped of any warmth or depth. It was as though we were strangers, connected only by a shared history that now felt like a lie. Jake's presence in my life, however unavoidable at the time, created a tension I could barely stand. Living with him after the betrayal was like living with a ghost, familiar yet haunting. Every glance he gave me felt weighted with guilt. Every attempt at normal conversation fell flat. I could see him trying, but his efforts only reminded me of how much he'd broken. The relationship that had once been my safe haven now felt like a prison, and the walls seemed to close in a little more each day. Even my relationship with my extended family started to change. My dad, ever the pragmatist, didn't think the secret would spread. "No one needs to know," he had said during one of our few tense conversations. But secrets have a way of slipping out, and when whispers of the truth began circulating, the judgment came quickly. People who had once been supportive and kind now seemed to look at me with pity, their questions thinly veiled behind polite smiles. "Are you okay?" became the new way of saying, "What happened?" Lauren, my best friend, was one of the few people I could still rely on. She'd sit with me for hours, listening as I tried to process everything. "You're stronger than you think," she told me more times than I could count. And while I appreciated her support, even our friendship wasn't immune to the ripple effect. I could see the discomfort in her eyes when I talked about my dad or Jake, an awkwardness that hadn't been there before. I hated that this situation had tainted even the most genuine connection in my life. But the impact didn't stop there. My social circle started to shrink as I pulled away from friends who didn't know the full story. How could I explain what I was going through without exposing the most humiliating parts of my life? The fear of judgment kept me silent, and that silence created distance. Even casual conversations felt forced, like I was pretending to be someone I no longer was. The isolation was suffocating. My relationship with myself also took a hit. I started questioning everything. My judgment, my instincts, even my self-worth. If I hadn't noticed the signs, what else was I blind to? If the people closest to me could betray me so deeply, did that mean I wasn't worth honesty or loyalty? These questions played on repeat in my mind, amplifying the emotional fallout and making it nearly impossible to move forward. And then there was Sam, my younger brother. He was caught in the crossfire, completely unaware of the storm brewing around him. My dad's behavior toward him didn't change. If anything, he seemed even more attentive, perhaps as a way to overcompensate for the chaos he'd caused. But I struggled to look at Sam without feeling a pang of guilt. He deserved a family he could trust, and now I wasn't sure if I could provide that for him. The awkwardness spilled over into every corner of my life. At work, my colleagues noticed I wasn't myself. One day, my supervisor pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. "You seem distracted," she said gently. I nodded, muttering something about personal issues, but her concern only reminded me of how much the situation had consumed me. Even strangers seemed to pick up on my emotional turmoil. A cashier once asked if I was having a bad day, and I almost broke down right there in the checkout line. The ripple effect extended beyond relationships. It seeped into my routines, my goals, my dreams. I had once been so focused on building a future for myself, but now even the idea of planning felt overwhelming. What was the point of working toward something when the foundation of my life was so unstable? Every decision felt clouded by the weight of the betrayal, and moving forward seemed like an impossible task. But as much as the ripple effect tore things apart, it also revealed which connections were worth holding on to. Lauren's unwavering support reminded me that not everyone would leave when things got hard. Sam's innocence gave me a reason to keep fighting, even on the days when I felt like giving up. And slowly, I began to realize that while the betrayal had fractured my relationships, it hadn't destroyed them completely. There was still room for repair, for rebuilding, for finding strength in the pieces that remained. The impact of the truth was far-reaching, but it also forced me to confront the realities of my life in a way I never had before. It showed me who I could count on, who I needed to let go of, and most importantly, who I wanted to become. And while the process of rebuilding felt daunting, I knew it was the only way to reclaim my sense of self and move toward a future I could be proud of. Deciding what to do next was, without question, the hardest part of the entire ordeal. The revelation had left me emotionally drained, unsure of who I could trust or what my next steps should be. Every decision felt monumental, like one wrong move could send everything crashing down again. But staying stuck in the pain wasn't an option. I had to figure out how to move forward, if not for anyone else, then for myself. The first question I wrestled with was whether or not I could forgive Jake. He had been my partner, my rock, the person I thought I could lean on no matter what. And yet, he had made a choice that betrayed everything we'd built together. His justification, claiming it was for my sake, did little to ease the sting. How could I trust him again when he'd gone behind my back in such a devastating way? I replayed our conversations over and over, searching for some sign that he truly understood the gravity of what he'd done. Jake begged me to stay. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said one night, his voice trembling with emotion. "Therapy, counseling, whatever you need. Just don't give up on us." His words sounded sincere, but sincerity couldn't erase the damage. I told him I needed space to think, though deep down, I wasn't sure there was anything left to save. Then there was my dad. Forgiving him felt even more complicated. He was my father, the person who was supposed to guide and protect me. But his actions had shown a level of manipulation and disregard for my feelings that I couldn't ignore. Every time I thought about confronting him again, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. Could I even have a relationship with him after this? Did I want one? The guilt was overwhelming. Part of me felt like I was being too harsh, like I should be more understanding of their mistakes. After all, hadn't I made mistakes too? But another part of me, the part that had been hurt and betrayed, knew that forgiveness couldn't be rushed. It had to come on my terms if it came at all. I spent hours journaling, trying to sort through my feelings. Writing helped me see things more clearly, though it didn't make the decisions any easier. On one page, I listed the reasons to try rebuilding my relationships with Jake and my dad. Love, history, the possibility of change. On the next, I wrote down all the reasons to let them go. Betrayal, broken trust, the emotional toll it had taken on me. The lists felt equally compelling, leaving me stuck in a limbo of indecision. Therapy became my anchor during this time. My therapist helped me see that there was no right or wrong decision, only the choice that was best for me. She encouraged me to set boundaries, to prioritize my own healing before worrying about anyone else. You don't owe them forgiveness, she said during one session. You owe yourself peace. As I reflected on her words, I realized that moving forward didn't necessarily mean cutting them out of my life completely. It meant deciding the role they would play, and setting boundaries to protect myself. With Jake, I decided to take a step back. I told him I needed time apart, a chance to figure out who I was outside of our relationship. He didn't take it well, pleading with me to reconsider, but I held my ground. For the first time in years, I chose myself over him. With my dad, the decision was more gradual. I started limiting our interactions, avoiding phone calls and visits unless absolutely necessary. When we did speak, I kept the conversations short and focused, refusing to engage in any topic that might reopen old wounds. It wasn't about punishing him, it was about preserving my own mental health. As I navigated these decisions, I found small victories in unexpected places. I started focusing on school again, rediscovering the passion that had driven me to pursue my degree in the first place. I reconnected with friends I'd distanced myself from, finding comfort in their unwavering support. I even picked up new hobbies, painting, yoga, things I'd never had time for before. Each small step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself that I had lost in the chaos. The moral dilemmas didn't disappear overnight. I still wrestled with questions about loyalty, forgiveness, and whether or not I was making the right choices. But I started to realize that healing wasn't about finding definitive answers. It was about learning to live with the questions. It was about giving myself permission to feel conflicted, to grieve what I'd lost, and to celebrate the strength I'd gained. One day, as I was journaling, I wrote something that stuck with me. I can't control what happened, but I can control what happens next. That sentence became my mantra, a reminder that while I couldn't change the past, I had the power to shape my future. It was a small shift in perspective, but it made all the difference. Deciding what comes next wasn't about choosing between Jake and my dad. It was about choosing myself. It was about rebuilding a life that felt authentic, one where I could prioritize my own happiness and well-being. And while the road ahead still felt uncertain, I finally felt like I was moving in the right direction. Looking back, it's incredible how much I learned about myself, about people, and about life through this experience. Betrayal has a way of shaking you to your core, of forcing you to reevaluate everything you thought you knew. And while I wouldn't wish what I went through on anyone, I can say that the lessons I took from it have made me stronger, wiser, and more determined to live authentically. The first and perhaps most important lesson I learned was about boundaries. For so long, I had blurred the lines between what I needed and what others expected of me. I let Jake's needs and my dad's authority overshadow my own instincts, convincing myself that keeping the peace was more important than speaking my truth. But this ordeal taught me that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential. I learned to say no, to protect my energy, and to prioritize my own well-being, even when it was uncomfortable. I also realized the power of self-respect. Betrayal can leave you feeling small, questioning your worth and wondering what you could have done differently. But through therapy, journaling, and self-reflection, I began to see that their choices weren't a reflection of me. They were a reflection of them. I wasn't betrayed because I was unworthy. I was betrayed because they made selfish decisions. That distinction was liberating. It helped me let go of the guilt I had been carrying and focus on rebuilding my confidence. Another key takeaway was the importance of trusting my instincts. Looking back, there were so many red flags, small signs that something wasn't right. But I ignored them, brushing off my gut feelings because I didn't want to believe that the people I loved could hurt me. Now I know better. I've learned to listen to that inner voice, to trust myself even when the truth feels uncomfortable. Ignoring your instincts doesn't make the problem go away. It only delays the inevitable. This experience also taught me about forgiveness, not just for others but for myself. For a long time I blamed myself for not seeing the signs, for trusting too easily, for letting myself be vulnerable. But through the healing process, I realized that holding on to that blame was only hurting me. Forgiving myself was the first step toward letting go of the pain and moving forward. And while forgiveness for Jake and my dad is still a work in progress, I've come to understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what they did. It means releasing the hold their actions had on me so I can focus on my own happiness. I also learned the value of resilience. There were days when I thought I'd never recover, when the weight of the betrayal felt too heavy to bear. But each small step, whether it was getting out of bed, going to therapy, or reconnecting with friends, was a reminder that I was stronger than I thought. Resilience isn't about bouncing back overnight. It's about finding the courage to keep moving forward, even when the path is unclear. One of the most surprising lessons was about love. I realized that love, while powerful, isn't enough on its own. Trust, honesty, and respect are just as important, if not more so. Love without those elements is fragile, easily shattered by betrayal and lies. This realization helped me redefine what I want in a relationship and what I'm willing to accept. It's not about settling or making excuses for someone's behavior. It's about building something real and honest. Perhaps the most empowering lesson was about the importance of choosing myself. For so long, I had put other people's needs and expectations ahead of my own. But this experience forced me to take a hard look at my life and ask myself what I truly wanted. And the answer was simple: I wanted peace. I wanted authenticity. I wanted a life that felt like mine, not one dictated by the choices of others. Rebuilding after betrayal isn't easy, but it's possible. It's about taking small, deliberate steps toward healing, even when it feels like you're not making progress. It's about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up, who remind you of your worth when you forget it. And it's about finding strength in the scars, knowing that they're a testament to everything you've survived. If there's one thing I hope others take from my story, it's this: pain doesn't define you. Betrayal doesn't define you. What defines you is how you choose to rise from it. It's not about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about having the courage to keep going, to keep believing in yourself, even when the world feels like it's falling apart. When I look back on everything I've been through, I realize just how much it shaped me. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss of trust, they've all left scars, but those scars are a part of who I am now. They remind me of how far I've come, of the strength I found when it felt like there was nothing left to hold on to. Moving forward hasn't been easy, but it's been worth every step. This experience taught me to redefine what family, love, and trust mean to me. It forced me to confront the uncomfortable truths about the people I held closest, and more importantly, it pushed me to reconnect with myself. I've learned that sometimes, the most important relationship you have is the one with yourself. When you're grounded in who you are, no one can take that away from you. not even the people who hurt you. But moving forward also means letting go, not of the memories but of the power they have over you. I've had to accept that I may never fully understand why my dad and Jake did what they did. And that's okay. Closure isn't about getting answers from someone else. It's about finding peace within yourself. It's about deciding that your happiness and your future are more important than staying stuck in the past. I've also come to realize that life doesn't wait for you to feel ready. There were so many moments when I thought, I'll start healing once I figure this out, or I'll move on when they've apologized. But healing doesn't work that way. It starts when you decide to take that first step, no matter how small. For me, it was focusing on school again, reconnecting with friends, and finding little pockets of joy in my daily life. Over time, those small steps added up to something bigger, a life that feels like mine again. Now I want to leave you with this. Don't let betrayal define you. Don't let someone else's mistakes rob you of your ability to trust, to love, to live fully. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's messy. But you're capable of so much more than you think. If I can rebuild from this, so can you. And I want to hear from you. What would you do in my situation? Have you ever faced something that shook you to your core? Let me know in the comments. I want this to be a space where we can share, connect, and grow together. Your story matters just like mine does. Before you go, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. Together, we're creating a community where we can talk about the hard stuff and come out stronger on the other side. Thank you for listening, for being here, and for taking this journey with me. Betrayal has a way of teaching us the hardest lessons, doesn't it? It forces you to confront truths you'd rather ignore and make decisions that reshape your entire life. But here's the thing, those moments of pain, they don't define you. What defines you is how you choose to rise above them. And if I've learned anything, it's that you have the power to rebuild, even when everything feels broken. Now, let me ask you, what would you do if the people you trusted most shattered your world? Would you confront them? Walk away? Try to rebuild? It's not an easy question, but it's one worth thinking about. And more importantly, what steps can you take today to set boundaries, prioritize your own well-being, and demand better for yourself? Don't let someone else's mistakes keep you from living the life you deserve. If this story resonated with you, I want to hear from you. Share your experiences in the comments. What's the biggest lesson betrayal has taught you? Let's create a space where we can learn from each other and grow together. And before you go, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you're the first to know when we dive into more powerful, life-changing stories like this. Your journey matters, and we're in this together. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.